All right, welcome in, everybody. This is Tony Patelis, your regular host for the College Hoop News podcast. Welcome back. It's been a long time. Last episode we did was, I believe, in March. We did a live Selection Sunday show episode. So it's nice to be back, and we're glad to be back talking some NBA draft tonight. I have a very special guest on. He is a big college basketball and NBA fan, so I thought it'd be nice to bring him in to talk. Eric Fawcett from GatorCountry.com, which covers Florida Gator sports. Also, he's going to be doing another preview in the Lindy's college basketball magazine that'll be probably out in a few months. Eric, how are you, man?
I'm doing very well. It's just nice to be talking about some of our favorites college basketball players, even though it's because their careers have come to a close in college and they're looking to go to the next step. It's still kind of nice to talk about some of those familiar names and familiar players that we've been able to watch the last few years.
Absolutely. So looking at this year's draft, last year's draft was really, really good. I know you were a big fan of it. Many were. What do you think about the overall look of this year's quarter of players?
I think if you're at the top of the lottery, you're definitely thinking you're going to get a good shot at a franchise player. There's no question. I think this is a great lottery. If you're kind of picking towards the bottom of the first round, I'm not sure if you're super stoked. Maybe you're not as excited as you would be if you were picking in that range in last year's draft. But yeah, last year's draft was just a lot stronger than I think the average one was. So this is a little bit bringing it back to earth, but still definitely a really strong lottery.
Absolutely. I see a lot of players that I think could turn into, stars, franchise guys, Eaton and Bagley. I'm somebody like Bamba is somebody who I really thought came on late last season. He was a little bit dicey offensively, but kind of figured things out later in the year. A lot of guys to talk about. So let's get into your kind of top 10 prospects. Obviously, number one, who most people think is going to go number one in the draft, is Deandre Eaton from Arizona. Here's a kid who averaged 20 and 11 last year, almost 2 blocks a game. Probably the most dominating player at the college level. He's a above average rim protector, excellent finisher. I think he probably needs to get better defensively, but he's probably looking like the clear-cut number one right now. He even kind of shot the ball not too bad last year. He was like 12 for 35 from three, which isn't terrible for somebody his size. What do you like about Ayton, and is he the clear-cut number one guy in your opinion?
I do think he's the clear-cut number one guy, and I think you just can't look past his physical gifts. If someone were to pass on Ayton, I mean, they're probably passing on a guy you might never see at the end or see in the draft ever again. Someone with those physical tools, I just don't think you're going to see that to the same extent. He just looks like he was built in a lab, and those physical tools mixed in with the fact that he has been shown some pretty good skill when he catches the ball and has a chance to square up or gets the ball on the block or shoots the ball from three. He's not like he's just this insanely raw talent either. He's looking pretty good, and you take a look at those physical tools. There's every coach in the league is going to look at a guy with those tools and say, "Oh yeah, I can make that player into a star." You mentioned that he maybe didn't have the best defensive instincts, and I totally agree with that. I don't think he has great defensive instincts, but any coach in the league is going to look at a guy like that with those tools and say, like, hey, with my coaching, I can turn this guy into a elite defender. And for all those reasons, I think he's definitely number one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only knock on him last year was his defense, and I don't think he was as bad as some say. I think they were just kind of hard on Arizona last year with all the issues going on there. But I thought he was okay. I don't think it's like a glaring, issue or anything. What do you think about his defensive issues per se?
Yeah, trying to kind of put it into context, I guess, with the lineups that they rolled out. A lot of times he wasn't playing the five. They played pretty big there in Arizona, and I think at the NBA level he's going to play probably exclusively the five. And to see that they had some pretty erratic guards, and even his shot blocking numbers by percentages aren't great. But of course, we all know they play that pack line defense in Arizona, where they're not going to allow a lot of stuff to even get to the rim and give him a chance to kind of swat things away. But I do think he probably struggled pretty badly in that NCAA tournament game that obviously is everyone's most recent look at him, and that probably hasn't helped his cause either, just because he didn't play very well in pick and roll defense. But that was a 1-game scenario, and even though obviously they lost as the higher seed, it's a lot of people look at it as a really bad knock on him. But it's 1 game, and I don't think anything like that is going to deter a team from taking him at number 1 and feeling very, very confident about it.
Yeah, and the good thing though is he's not very foul prone. He defends without fouling pretty well. I think he only averaged like 2.3 fouls per game last year, so that's a good sign. I think his motor sometimes can be in question. I think sometimes last year he was a little lazy, but I mean, for an 18, 19-year-old kid, that's to be expected sometimes, I think.
Yeah, the motor concerns. You also just look at the up and down season they had, and
Right.
all the uncertainties just around their roster and everything. I can see a little bit why you might get not particularly focused at 19, like you said.
Absolutely. All right, so moving on, your number 2 guy is Marvin Bagley out of Duke. Had a phenomenal season for the Blue Devils, averaged 21 and 11. Elite rebounder to me. I think he's pretty tenacious too for a young kid. Can finish around the basket. Same type of thing with Eaton. I think his defense needs to improve, especially on the perimeter. He's not a great shot blocker either. At 6'11", he only had 29 blocks. Shot the 3 pretty well, though, 39%. I think he took 58 on the season. He was a better shooter than I thought. I'm not a big high school prospect guy. You hear so much good things about these kids, but he was definitely a better shooter than I anticipated. What do you like so much about Marvin Bagley?
I just like his production, just the way that he was able to just be really dominant at every level of play he's been at up to this point. And that's one thing that I think is really interesting about him, as opposed to maybe guys like Jaren Jackson or Mo Bamba or some of these other big men that are going to be talked about for this number 2 spot. Is just every time anyone has seen Bagley kind of step on a court in the last 3 years, he's been about the most dominant player in the game at whatever level of competition that's been, whether it's been international or high school or at the college game. You mentioned that you thought Deandre Eaton was probably the most dominant player in college basketball last year. And I think that Marvin Bagley would have a pretty good argument for maybe him being the most dominant player in college basketball. Just the way that he physically overmatched so many players and was just able to score out of he'd catch the ball at the elbow and be able to confidently take a couple dribbles and get it to the hoop, or obviously he was so huge on the offensive glass. I just think you look at a guy like that's just been, you look at every level of basketball he's played at, he's been pretty much the best player in the league, or the level of basketball he's played at. He's been pretty much the best player on the floor at all times. And I just think that's a guy who can kind of figure out how to win. And I think Sacramento is a team that probably wants someone that's going to be productive right away. And Bagley just seems like a guy that could step right into the NBA and score 13 points and get 8 rebounds a game, and as a rookie. So I think I know not everyone is going to have him being taken second, but that's where I see it happening.
Now, do you think his kind of lack of strength is going to be an issue at the NBA level? I know, he's probably going to put on some pounds, but do you think that's going to be a problem at all for him? Because he's not the biggest guy in the world.
No, he looks a little bit slight, but I wonder if he's going to have to go through some kind of physical transformation, whether it's getting stronger or maybe he just decides that he's going to just go the quickness route and try to be a quicker guy. And obviously he gets the left-handed kind of, people equate him to being like Chris Bosh a lot, but maybe that's what he kind of goes, I'm going to stay kind of slender, but I'm going to work on my quickness, which I thought he actually had pretty good feet, but I don't think they were, excellent. I don't think he's going to be switching out to a whole lot of guards right away, but maybe that's something he works on instead of bulking up. But I do think he'll have to go through some kind of physical kind of training. But again, he was a guy that was probably, I guess technically supposed to be going into high school this year and instead played at Duke. So he was supposed to be, that obviously we don't have to talk about that, but yeah, so considering that, maybe he's not a finished product physically, and an NBA kind of weight training program is going to help him out.
Alrighty. Your next guy on your list, number 3, is an international kid. I kind of wanted to stick to the college prospects tonight, but I'm actually interested in Lucca Doncic because I haven't really seen him play at all. Are you a believer in this kid? What are your thoughts on his game?
I'm a huge believer. Yeah, I found myself using Synergy to watch a lot of his games this past year. NBA TV in Canada was showing his games as well, and even kind of going back to international competition in the Euros, where he really dominated Kristaps Porzingis, and he really dominated Ricky Rubio when they played Spain, and he really dominated Evan Fournier head to head when he played France. Like he's just so used to playing against men, and I think you see the production he's put up. He's just a lot more of a safe pick than I think people are giving him credit for, because he's not this guy who is. He's not playing in the middle of nowhere where there's only cell phone footage of this guy. He's playing for perhaps the best team that doesn't play in the NBA. In that league, he's playing in what's definitely the best league outside of the NBA, and he's played probably 150 games in the last two years for them, because they play more of a pro schedule than, or I guess closer to an NBA schedule than a college schedule. So I just think he's been pretty consistent, putting up great numbers against great competition. And when you see that kind of sense for the game, I do value that over maybe his lack of athleticism or his lack of physical gifts.
Yeah. How is he in the toughness category? Is he somebody who's looked to as, as a hard guy, or, is he a little soft? What do you think about his toughness aspect?
Well, I've always thought, honestly, I feel like a lot of the people who look at European prospects and kind of question their toughness, I feel like a lot of them just don't watch European basketball, because it's way more physical than the NBA. It's way more physical than college. They're not calling touch fouls. They're not calling fouls for chucking cutters. It's a very clutch and grab game, which I guess maybe that still can't be viewed as toughness, but he's used to playing a physical brand of basketball. I'll say that it's always tough to for me, I guess, to kind of look at a player and judge his toughness and his tenacity. But I will say he is certainly used to playing a physical brand of basketball, because that's what they play over there. So he definitely, again, he's another guy that needs to put on some weight and needs probably a better strength and conditioning program than he might have had there. But yeah, he's a guy who's used to getting grabbed. He's used to playing physical, and he's used to playing against things that'll get called 100% of the time in the NBA that maybe got called 15% of the time playing in Europe.
Right. All right, so at number 4, we're back to the college kids. Mo Bamba averaged 13, 10, and almost 4 blocks a game last year at Texas. Now, pretty much this kid's an absolute freak in nature. At first I wasn't a big Bamba fan, to be honest, Eric. When I saw him on the offensive end of the floor early last season, I kind of cringed. He just didn't look like he knew what he was doing. But I thought he really improved as the year went on. He's got a lot better shooting stroke than I actually anticipated. He still needs to work, obviously, shooting the basketball. He needs some work in the toughness department. Obviously, his motor sometimes is questioned. But, I mean, this kid, I think, has the possibility to turn out to be maybe the best player in this draft. How do you feel about Bamba?
Yeah, well, it's very similar to the conversation we just had about Ayton, about his physical gifts, and the way that it's going to be tough for a team to look at a guy with that ridiculous wingspan, and the way that he ran the 3/4 court sprint, faster than just about everyone at his size. His jumping ability, what he touches, and with his vertical leap, there's just going to be all those things that you just, again, we just talked about why teams are going to take Ayton number 1 because of his physical gifts. Then you look at Bamba, he might even have more physical gifts. So like you said, I mean, if he figures it out and becomes a half decent offensive player, but is a guy who can swat every shot at the rim and brings a level of shot blocking we haven't seen in the NBA for potentially ever, just because of he has physical gifts like we've never seen, he could end up being the best player from the draft. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. I probably have him a little bit higher than other people do, but I do think he's probably for sure going to be a top 7 guy. And but it'll be really interesting to see what team looks at his kind of rawness and says, maybe I don't want to do that, versus a team that says, like, wow, this guy has physical gifts like we've never seen. I would have taken him higher. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think his value on the defensive end is just so important that I think if a team, drafted him and he became, like you said, a average offensive player, I think they'd still be happy, because he's such a force. Averaging 4 blocks a game. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Oh yeah, like, I mean, you just see, obviously Clint Capella suddenly became a player in the NBA that's super sought after, a player like that. and you just see his size and what he touches, and then you say, well, look at how much faster Mo Bamba is in a straight line. Look how much longer Mo Bamba is. Look how much taller, how much higher he can jump with his vertical leap. I think a lot of teams are thinking like, hey man, if Clint Capella is this valuable like this, look at what Mo Bamba could be.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. Number 5, we have Jaren Jackson Jr., Michigan State freshman. Jackson Jr. averaged 11 points a game, 5.5 rebounds, 3 blocks. Only played 21 minutes per game. As we know, Michigan State had a really deep front court last year. I don't think he was great in college. I think the potential's obviously there. Got into foul trouble quite a bit last year, but he's a versatile defender, excellent shot blocker. Offensive game certainly needs work. The foul trouble was a big thing for me. It looks like he just couldn't defend without fouling last year. I think that was a big factor for why I'm not a big fan of him yet. Obviously, there's untapped potential there, but why do you like Jackson so much?
Well, that's interesting because it's just crazy because if you look at a lot of people's draft coverage now, it seems like me putting him at 5 would be a lot lower than a lot of people have him who think that he might go as high as number 2. But he is a guy that looks to be pretty switchable, though, like you said, as much as a guy that has a reputation as being a guy you can switch out on guards a lot, I think he fouled a lot, and those were a lot of his fouls. It wasn't necessarily him preventing a layup with a foul. It was him getting switched on a guard and hand checking. And obviously we know how much the college refs like to call hand checks, but that's going to be I just wonder if he's as good switching out on the perimeter as many people think. But he is a guy that has good physical tools. He's one of the youngest players in the draft, and he's a guy that shoots the 3 ball pretty well. So I think a team's looking at him and just thinks, hey, if we can have a defensive anchor who also can go and maybe shoot 40% from the 3-point line like he did. I think he shot 40% or higher than that or something, a good percent. A team's looking at that and thinks, hey, that's really valuable in today's NBA to have a rim protector who can go and space the floor. So I think there's going to be teams that fall in love with him.
Yeah, I think he's your prototypical, NBA forward these days, two-way guy who can do a lot of different things. So I'm excited to see how he develops because, again, I don't think he was super impressive last year. And again, he was on a veteran-laden team, so he didn't really stand out like, a guy like Bagley who was on the floor with a bunch of freshmen. He was on the floor with a bunch of seniors, a guy like Miles Bridges who took a lot of the shots. So it'll be interesting to see. So moving on, Trey Young, okay, he's at number 6 on your board. Averaged 28 points a game last year, almost 9 assists, 36% from 3. Really was the star in college basketball last year. Just a tremendous scorer. Can really score from anywhere on the court. Really his range is just incredible. Excellent passer, everything you would want in a guard. But, really the physical attributes, I think, is what worries people. Can he guard at the NBA level? Obviously, was his defensive issues because he was conserving energy on the offensive end? That's a question. I see so many different takes on Trey Young. It seems like people either love him or hate him. What do you think about this kid?
I mean, out of those two kind of spectrums, I'd definitely be more on the side of loving him. There's no question. You see the offensive load and the usage rate he used. I just don't think that's just unlike anything we've seen in college basketball. And to see him be pretty productive, yes, he had lots of turnovers, whatever. He was doing it at a usage rate we've never seen before. So I do think he's so gifted offensively that he's going to find a way to score. And you were talking about his kind of lack of physical gifts, which makes me a little hesitant the way that I put him to the Magic, because the Magic have historically been really into picking players based on physical potential. And you obviously look, they did it last year with taking Jonathan Isaac. But I think that because they are filled with so many athletes but lack shooting and skill, I think this will be their chance to be like, hey, we can put a guy like Trey Young on the floor because we have Bismack Biyombo protecting the hoop, and we've got Aaron Gordon out there who can switch on to anything, and Jonathan Isaac who's going to cover up a lot of defensive mistakes. I think they'd actually be pretty comfortable with Trey Young defensively, just because they'll have so much help around him. But they certainly don't have a lot of playmakers in Orlando, and that's where they could really use him. So I think it's a really good fit. Oh, go on.
Do you compare him at all to Steph Curry? Because I just think it's more of a size thing. I've heard that name pop up a lot when talking about Trey Young. Do you find them comparable at all? Because Curry is he's more of a shooter, not more of a point guard, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the way that Trey Young passed the ball and his assist numbers and his ability to distribute, you don't see that from Steph Curry.
Right.
That's so like Steph Curry to me, like arguing about what position a player plays is obviously. So I do feel like it's kind of foolish, but Steph Curry is really just he's a scoring guard, and I do think that Trey Young, if he decided if he was put into a situation where he didn't need to be the primary scorer like he was at Oklahoma, I still think he could go out there and put up 10 assists. Like just the way he distributes the ball. If he decides he wants to be that player, or he goes to a team that needs him to be that player, maybe they goes to a team. This wouldn't be the Magic, but if he goes to a team that has some more scorers on the wing and they need him to distribute, I think he could do that. Where Steph Curry is a scorer. I don't think if his jump shot somehow eluded him and he couldn't shoot the ball anymore, I don't think he'd be a very effective NBA player because I don't think he distributes at a high enough level. But I think that Trey Young does distribute at an NBA level, and then obviously has the ability to shoot off the bounce. That's really fun.
Yeah, he's definitely exciting. He came out of nowhere last year. I don't think anybody expected him to put up the numbers that he did. He pretty much carried that Oklahoma team. He didn't have much around him, and for them to get to the NCAA tournament was pretty impressive. So at number 7, Michael Porter Jr. Now, this is an interesting story because Porter pretty much missed all of last season with a back injury. I think before the college season started last year, he was looked at as the number 1 prospect, as a guy that would probably go number 1 in the draft, maybe even a slam dunk to go number 1 in the draft. But after missing a year with the injuries, things have kind of changed a bit. But he's kind of the same thing where he's literally the model of what you want in the NBA nowadays. A 6'11" guy, can shoot it, versatile. I mean, he could easily end up being the guy in this draft still. But, a couple things have come out about his personality and some issues, with I don't even know what the exact issues were, but I was reading about it the other day. What do you think's been going on with Porter, and why do you think people have kind of stepped off him a little bit?
Well, I definitely think that when you see his injury concerns, that scares you a lot to see, because it was his back at first in college, and that's what left him out of obviously Missouri, and that's scary enough to have back problems at that age. I know a lot of people where his back injuries were the same thing that Tiger Woods had that kept him from golf, and it was actually also the same thing that kept Steve Kerr out of coaching last year. Wow. But obviously those are guys that are, Steve Kerr's in his 40s or whatever, and Tiger's in his late 30s. So that's not what you want to see about a 19-year-old. And then he had his workout that had to be canceled because it was kind of said that he couldn't get out of bed, and it was because of hip strain. So if you look at a guy with back and hip problems, that's got to be really scary. Like, where do you want to use a lottery pick on? Do you want to use it on a guy that you worry has a bad back and bad hips? Like that is very scary. But I mean, you look at what he did in high school, to see that all his kind of high school accolades and what he did for Team USA, his accolades up until the point he got to college, he was kind of like the most accomplished player, at least the most accomplished high school player since like LeBron James. So you can certainly see why a team might be like, hey, if we can get him at 7 or 8 or 9, if he falls that far, you might be able to stumble into a guy that should have been a slam dunk number 1 pick. So it'll be a gamble for sure. But like you mentioned, if he pans out to 60% of his potential, he's a perfect player for the modern game, and some team is going to have to risk a high pick on him because the reward could just be so huge.
Absolutely, he's just one of those perfect combo forwards that the NBA loves, and he the potential's still there. It's just interesting how he's kind of pushed himself down. But I think the injuries have had a lot to do with that. But we'll see what happens. You never know. He could maybe get up in that. Well, how high do you think he could go to, on the 22nd, do you think?
I mean, it's tough to say because, I mean, if you're – I would say maybe realistically number 4 would be maybe the highest I could kind of see him going. But at the same time, I mean, if he were to go like number 2 and their team doctors feel comfortable with it, it wouldn't be that ridiculous when you look at the fact that, like, hey, you look at these at the top of the draft with all these big men, and if you're an NBA team saying, hey, let's look at the NBA finals where there were no big men who were relevant, do we want to draft a big man, or do we want to take a shot at a guy like Michael Porter Jr.? I mean, I could see it happening, but I'll say somewhat realistically, he maybe goes as high as 4. All
righty. Okay, so at number 8, we have Colin Sexton, point guard from Alabama. Averaged almost 20 points a game last year, almost 4 assists. 33% from 3-point land. I love his quickness. He's a pretty good defender. He gets to the foul line quite a bit. I think his shooting is obviously the major factor with a lot of people. Is he strictly a one in your opinion, or is he too small to play the two? I think he's listed at 6'3", but I don't think he's that big in my opinion. What do you think about Sexton overall?
I love his competitiveness and I love his demeanor on the court. And I could just see how there'd be teams that would look at his competitiveness and just say like, I think a lot of teams would actually have him as their number one kind of point guard in the class, just because of that competitiveness and the physical gifts he kind of has more than Trey Young. Not that he's that big. He's not super tall. It doesn't have really huge wingspan, but just to see that he is so explosive and in a straight line is so quick and he can take contact and finish at the hoop really well. And I'm honestly surprised when you look at him. I thought he was kind of, a really bad shooter, but the fact that he was even in the kind of the low mid 30s from three is a little bit better than I probably thought. But I think kind of historically, if you actually look at how the way teams have drafted in the NBA, I don't think that they're all that too concerned with players who can't shoot very well. I feel like shooting is the thing that teams look at and say like, hey, that is one thing that we can develop in a player. You can't teach. You can make, maybe with your strength and conditioning, you can make a player a little bit more athletic, but you can't make Trey Young into a Colin Sexton athlete. You can't teach Colin Sexton's kind of competitiveness. You can't teach his tenacity for the game. And I just think there's teams that are, again, another guy that people are just going to fall in love with and see as a guy that the teammates will really love and a guy that they'd love to have in the locker room. So, I have him at 8.
It was interesting to me last year, Avery Johnson kind of had him, running the show early in the season, and Alabama's offense was kind of stagnant, and they kind of moved him off the ball, and it was a lot more free-flowing. So that's why I was kind of asking you, do you think he's definitely going to be a point guard in the league or more of a combo?
That's interesting. I don't know if he's ever going to be a guy you obviously run off screens or maybe he's not going to be an elite floor spacer, but he's a guy that with his kind of ability to finish at the rim and the way he has so much speed and explosion, he could be a really big cutting threat. I obviously have him going to Cleveland, and I definitely don't think LeBron is coming back, but if LeBron were to come back and he's your primary ball handler, Colin Sexton's a guy that on defense could really just hound the other team's point guard, but then on offense could be a guy that sits in the corner and as soon as his defender looks away, backdoor cuts him and finishes strong at the hoop. So I could see it. And again, he's a guy that I love his kind of competitiveness and guys with his mindset. I think that they can play wherever you want them, whether you want him on the ball, off the ball. He just loves to play and he's going to find a way to be successful.
Yeah, he plays really hard. I will give him that. It's obviously the shooting issues, as we said, but I think he can be a pretty successful pro. Our number 9 on the list, you have Kentucky forward Kevin Knox. Averaged 15 and 5 last year, 34% from 3. This is a kid that I kind of, grew on me as the year went on. The more I watched him play, the more I liked his game. I think if he continues to improve, he can be an elite scorer at the NBA level. I think he can kind of score in any way you need him to. I think obviously he's still learning. He's young, toughness, defense. He's got to shoot better from behind the arc. I think he's got to be a better rebounder for the size he has. But the kid can absolutely fill it up offensively, and I think that's going to be a key for a lot of teams. What do you think about Knox?
Yeah, he's a guy who I think his jump shot kind of passes the eye test, even though it didn't pass. It's not like he shot a great percentage. But if you look at the way he shoots, he's got a great looking stroke, and the ball leaves his hand nicely. And he's just a guy that I could look at. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we see that he's actually a good shooter at the NBA level or even an above average shooter. I also thought he took a lot of shots off the move because I do think that offense at Kentucky is pretty stagnant, and he was kind of the guy that had to make things happen a lot of times at the end of the clock. And a lot of those jump shots were tough ones that he had to shoot off the dribble. And yeah, so he's a guy I do believe in. I think is a little bit better than his numbers. And then it's another one where you kind of just talk about like, hey, what are teams kind of desiring in the NBA right now? And it's versatile wings. And there's not a lot of them at the top of the draft here. So, do I think that Kevin Knox is necessarily the the ninth best player? Do I think he's in a vacuum the ninth best prospect? Maybe I don't. But because he's a wing, that makes him a lot more valuable than some guys like maybe a Wendell Carter, who I really, really like, but plays a position that is not as desired. So, for that reason, I think Kevin Knox is going to find his way into the top 10.
I will say this, Eric, he has the best floater in the draft. He had a tremendous floater last year. He could really, get to the basket. So I'm excited to see how he pans out because I'm a big fan of Knox. I thought he played pretty well, especially late for that young Kentucky team. All right, so at 10, you have Mikal Bridges. And this kid averaged 17.7 points per game, 5.3 rebounds per game, shot 43% from three. Now, let me just say, I've always been a big Bridges fan, but I never thought in my wildest dreams he would have turned into this good of an offensive player. He was outstanding this season. I thought he'd be like a 3-and-D guy, but he looks like the total package now. He improved so much on the offensive end. He's pretty good off the dribble as well. I'm stunned at his improvement. I really am. How much do you like this kid?
Well, like you said, he has the kind of prototypical wing size at the NBA. He shoots the ball well when he has his feet set. He does things well off the dribble. He's kind of like a jack of all trades kind of guy, and that's really useful to have. There's in the back of my mind, there is always that thing about him where it's just like, was he able to shoot the ball so well because he was at Villanova and had so many open shots? Or, was he able to work off the dribble so well because their spacing was so good and teams couldn't help off as much? There's a little small part of me that says like, hey, maybe he's not quite as good as he looked just because he was in such a potent offense. But at the same time, he's also a guy who now knows winning basketball and has been a part of 2 championships in 3 years, which very few players will ever have the opportunity to do out of college. And I also have him going to the 76ers, where would go to be in a city he's obviously used to and going to play in a building he's already played in a ton. There's also just the fact that because of that crazy Twitter burner account situation, the 76ers don't have a GM right now. Their, Coach Brown he's handling the draft for them. And right. I don't think he's probably watched too many. I don't think he's going to go find a sleeper. I think he might look at the guy that played in the same building that his team plays in, look at a player who won a championship and get Mikal Bridges. And that could work for him because they need shooting, and you can never have enough wings in today's NBA. So, I really like him. And I never would have thought he'd be a top 10 draft pick, if we're being honest, but we find ourselves here.
Yeah, and I think even if he doesn't pan out to be a big-time scorer at the NBA level, I think he's going to be an excellent perimeter defender for a team, a guy that can knock down threes. So I think he'll be a valuable piece at least a valuable piece for a team, if not a big-time scorer or something like that. So the last guy you did mention, though, on your list, Eric, was Wendell Carter. Duke forward, averaged 13.5 last year, 9 rebounds, 2 blocks per game, shot it well from 3, 41%. I think he kind of, first off, was in kind of a Marvin Bagley shadow a bit, kind of a quiet guy. He's one of the more well-rounded players in the draft, in my opinion. To me, though, he's kind of missing that wow factor, if you know what I mean. So, he doesn't do anything. Does he do anything great, or he just does everything well? He's kind of one of those guys. What do you think? I don't really know a ton about him. What do you think about Wendell Carter?
Yeah, I think you said it really well when you said he kind of does everything kind of pretty well, but nothing great. He passes the ball pretty well, but it's not like he's a point guard, obviously, and he scores pretty well, but it's not like he's not Deandre Eaton or Marvin Bagley, and he rebounds really well, but you just wonder if he'll do that at the NBA level. But that's what's really interesting just to see is could he be a guy who's like Al Horford light? Because that's a guy Al Horford, who I don't think does anything super well, but does everything, does a little bit of everything. And I think Wendell Carter is a guy who might be more reliant on fit than just about anyone. But if he goes to a team that has a lot of good pieces around him where he can pass the ball and set screens and get on the offensive glass and find an open jump shot, he could be a guy that's just a really valuable, this term's probably overused, but a glue guy. He might be an excellent glue guy at the NBA level. So I really like him, but I can see why a team looks at him and says, again, just looking at maybe the lack of bigs that were relevant in the NBA finals and say like, hey, do we think that Wendell Carter really fits into this mold. But to me, one, I'll also say I do think the league is going to go back to bigger basketball here pretty quick. But also I could see why he does lack the wow factor, like you mentioned. But he also does a little bit well, where I think a team that might have four guys in the rotation they really like, and Wendell Carter could be the fifth guy that really brings everything together.
You know who he kind of reminds me of, Eric? Al Horford. Like
Yeah.
Horford, is one of these guys that he's not a star, but he does everything well. He can shoot the three, he can play defense, he can score down low. So he kind of reminds me of somebody like that, like who's not going to be an all-star or a star, but he could be on that fringe maybe and be a quality player for a long time.
Yeah, to have a big that can pass the ball like that and hit a shot when he's open and just kind of play smart basketball, that's a player I really love.
Absolutely. All right, so those are Eric's top prospects. Definitely look out for them on the draft this week. So, Eric, I got 5 guys I wanted to ask you about. I really wanted to get your opinion on. So we'll get right to it right now. First one is Kyrie Thomas, junior out of Creighton. He averaged 15 points a game this past year, 4.5 rebounds. Now, he might be my favorite prospect. He's a fantastic defender. He can shoot the three, 41%. He's got a 6'10" wingspan. I think he's only 6'3". He's your prototypical two-way player. He's excellent on both ends, in my opinion. I think he could turn out to be a really, really good pro. Are you a fan of Thomas?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to have a guy that competes that hard defensively and can kind of create his own shot, there's not a lot of guys like that, just to be quite frank. If you look at guys that create their own shot like he does, a lot of them are not good defenders. So that's a big mark for him, positively, of course. And my maybe only concern with him is just the fact that he might be a guy that's a little bit too small in some matchups, just because one thing that you're seeing in the league right now is we used to talk about kind of tweeners being guys that were not quite, they were probably too big to play the small forward, but weren't quite big enough to play the to play the power forward. But now what you're really seeing is tweeners are kind of guys that are kind of pure shooting guards, that if teams kind of go bigger on the wings, if you're a shooting guard that doesn't play the point, you're going to have kind of struggles. That was Victor Oladipo's problem, I think, for a lot of years, until he kind of found a really good situation. And even Norm Powell's a guy that had a really good start to his NBA career and now couldn't get on the floor for the Raptors, just because there's very few matchups that just a guy who's just a shooting guard, that's not a point guard, that won't be able to guard small forwards. They can be a little bit tough to fit in sometimes. And that would be my one concern with him. But I thought he played winning basketball. I think he makes winning basketball plays and finds a way. And I think he will find a way for whatever team he gets drafted by.
And just really quick, how high do you think he could go in the draft?
Ooh, I mean, he's a guy that, I mean, if a team kind of took him around the 20 range, I wouldn't be too surprised, because, hey, he can defend and he can shoot the ball and he can create his own shot. Those are 3 tough skills, and he's kind of got them all. I have him going 32nd, which, as I'm looking at it again just in front of me, that feels low. I feel like I should have had him higher, and maybe I'll change that before I kind of tweet out my final rankings. But yeah, he's a guy I actually do think he gets into that first round for sure.
All right. Second guy was Miles Bridges. He averaged 17, 7, and 36% from 3 last year. Now, Bridges is one of those rare cases where he, very surprisingly came back to school. Now, it doesn't look like it's going to hurt him too much. He looks like to be a possible lottery pick, obviously. I think he really kind of altered his game this year by moving out on the perimeter a lot more. He took 144 threes his freshman year. This past year, he took 200 in his sophomore year. But he also took a lot of 17, 18-foot jumpers as well. So I think he was trying to maybe show the scouts what he's capable of. What do you think about his overall game? Do you think it'll translate to the league?
I'm interested. I'm still not entirely sure how I see him kind of fitting in. I still am not really certain what he does at a high enough level to be a guy that's worthy of a lottery pick, I guess, in some ways. A lot is made out of the interview process in the NBA kind of draft combine and in individual workouts. And one thing I would love to ask Miles Bridges is just to ask him, like, hey, if we were down 1 with 15 seconds on the clock and we had a timeout to run any play for you to try to get us a bucket, what would that play be? Would you want the ball to be isolated for you? Would you want to come off a screen? Would you want to get the ball on a dribble handoff? I would be really interested what he would say, because I personally don't know. He just doesn't have a kind of well-defined offensive role to me, and I think he'll be a decent defender with his size and kind of his physicality. But there's still some kind of fit things where I just am not totally sure exactly where he fits in. But he's definitely a guy that's probably going to go at the late end of the lottery, and a team is probably going to have a better idea than me what they're going to use him for. But I'm a little bit interested to see what he is at the NBA level.
Yeah, I think the way he played this past season kind of hurt Michigan State. He was more of a driver, aggressive the year before, and I think this year he was kind of a little bit more soft, a little bit taking a lot of jump shots. So I think that kind of hurt the Spartans. But we'll see. He's got a lot of talent. He's gifted. He's got a lot of size, strong kid. So I'm interested to see as well. The third player I wanted to ask you out, I'm a very big fan of this kid, Aaron Holiday, UCLA. Guard, had a fantastic season, averaged 20 points a game, almost 6 assists, 42% from three. If it wasn't for Deandre Eaton, he would have been the Pac-12 Player of the Year. I'm a big Holiday guy. I think, like I said, he had a fantastic year. I think he's going to be your quintessential 12 to 15-year pro. At the very least, will be an excellent backup or even a solid starter for a club for a very long time. I know he's pretty small. He's only 6'1", about 185 pounds. He's super quick, can shoot it, as I said. What do you think about Aaron Holiday?
I love him. I just really he's a guy that if he ended up being the best point guard in the draft, it's probably a surprise, but it's also just kind of wouldn't, because he's got I actually don't know if I'm super concerned about his size, just because I think at the combine he had like a 6'7" wingspan, so he probably plays a little bit bigger than his height would say. But he shoots the ball so well, and he's done it at such a consistent level. If you look at his 3-point percentage, it's been over 41% for all 3 years in college. And to see a guy shooting 41% as a freshman is crazy, but to see him keep it up for 3 seasons, he's a legitimate shooter. Like, to shoot the ball that consistently, I think he's going to shoot the 3 really well. So you have a guy that can has a lot of speed, can defend really well, and can shoot the 3, and just kind of has a nose for scoring. It's hard for me to not see him be a rotation player in the NBA. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like his floor is really high. Maybe he doesn't have the super high ceiling, but I just can't see him not being a rotation NBA player, at least. So someone's going to get him probably at the bottom half of the first round, and it's going to be really happy with him.
I'm right there with you. At the very least, he'll be a very good rotation player for a very long time in the NBA. So the last 2 players I wanted to ask you about, here's a little hint. Neither of them played basketball this past season. The first kid is De'Anthony Melton, who's a USC kid who missed all of last season, with the FBI probe going on. So the Trojans kept him out. So first of all, I love his versatility. I'm a big versatility guy. I think if he didn't sit out this past season, he could possibly be a top 20 pick. But he still could be a steal in maybe the late first round, early second. I don't see him as ever being maybe a big-time scorer, but he's one of those guys who kind of really just does everything on the court. He's really good defender. I think he's one of these guys that every night could have 10 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, some type of stat line like that on a consistent basis. He's an elite perimeter defender. I really like this kid a lot. What do you think about De'Anthony Melton?
I'm interested. He definitely defended at a high level, but I just wonder, he just shot the ball fairly poorly, but he obviously was a freshman, and it's crazy because he actually shot the ball really, really well in workouts and at the combine. So which that kind of maybe halted those kind of thoughts, but I'm just looking at his combine numbers. Yeah, he's one of the top when they did all the NBA distance shooting. He was one of the top guys from 3, and that's you wouldn't have expected that looking at his kind of freshman stats. Right. But again, that's him as a freshman, and he had tons of steals. He was so active in the passing lanes that right. I think he'll find a way to be a good defender. He's a little bit of that. I think he's probably in that kind of size range that we just talked about with Kyrie Thomas, and maybe I think he's probably a guy that I might pick before Melton. But yeah, you see these guards that have that much kind of defensive intensity. I think it's easy to it's easy to want a guy like that. It's easy to see that he shoots the ball well. I think that's probably enough in the combine. I think that's enough for a team to want to take him.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I don't think he's ever going to be a big time scorer, but I think he's somebody who can contribute in a lot of different phases and play great defense. So he's going to be pretty valuable. The last kid I wanted to ask you about, Mitchell Robinson. So what do we know besides the kid makes poor decisions and he's 6'10"? Like, what do we know about this kid?
I mean, if you look at him back in high school, I mean, he was outplaying some of like the Deandre Eatons, and he played pretty well against Marvin Bagley in a game that I watched. But what you mentioned it, like he making such bad decisions. If you're a team that was going through the interview process with him, I think you just have to ask him like, where did you get this this counsel from? Like, who is giving you this advice to handle these things this way? And that just, I think that would terrify me. And also you were looking at or his agent put out this video of him onto Twitter of one of their workouts, and it was like 5 minutes of him running off screens and catch and shooting 3-point shots. And I just wonder, like, does he think that that's what a team is going to want him for? And I wonder if he knows the role. Like, I think a team just wants him to be a run and jump big man who has really active feet and can switch out, and he's got incredible physical gifts. And a lot of the guys like Jonathan Gavoni from Draft Express, who I think does such a good job, talked about him being just a small hair below a guy like Jaren Jackson in terms of his foot speed and versatility with the similar physical gifts. And but then you see him running off screens and trying to catch and shoot fadeaway 3-pointers. And I wonder about his decision making off the court. I wonder if he knows what role he should kind of be searching in the NBA. And he's just, there's some red flags, or maybe I should say they're yellow flags, but there's a lot of yellow flags and some potential red flags that, if only I could be in the interview process to see how some of these teams kind of got through to him. But I'm interested to see where he goes.
Yeah. And I don't know how much of it is actually him or his inner circle, in his ear. You just really don't know. I think every situation is different. But, after everything that went on last year, if he just went to Western Kentucky, stayed in school, they had a really successful season, he probably would be a top 15 pick right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, if you look at the just his kind of recruiting rankings and you see the physical gifts and you see that, Mo Bamba and Jaren Jackson, they're going to get drafted potentially both in the top 5 just based on their physical tools. And Mitchell Robinson is not that far off in terms of his physical tools. So, if he just did his thing and played college ball, he could be in that conversation. But unfortunately, now you just wonder where he'll go.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting. I'm very interested and intrigued to see where he lands. But actually, I wanted to add one more guy before we move on to some second round sleepers. And somebody from your neck of the woods is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the Kentucky guard. How fantastic was he this past season? I think he really came out of nowhere, played a lot better than people anticipated. He looks like he's going to be a top, maybe even 10, 15 pick this year. What do you like about Alexander?
Well, he does really good things out of the pick and roll, and I think a lot of it does relate to just his height, the way he can see passing angles, and the way he can make passes just due to his length. You talked about, maybe Aaron Holiday being a guy who's a little bit short. There's passes that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can make that a guy like Aaron Holiday just can't make because he can go over the top. He has like that 7-foot wingspan, and I mean he's 6'6", so he might go into a pick and roll situation, try to get trapped by a 6'10" center and still be able to just pass over the top. And that would be scary for a lot of defenses. He theoretically shot the ball pretty well because he shot 40% from 3, but I think that might be a little bit of fool's gold just because I think he only took like 1.4 attempts per game or something like that. So I feel like there's not many guys who are legitimate shooters that only shoot 1.5 threes a game, particularly on a team that really needed shooting and spacing. So I'm not sure if I actually buy him as being a good shooter, which is funny to say for a guy who shot 40%, but still, I don't know if I buy it quite yet. But you just see the way that he can finish at the hoop with his length and pass the ball and defend at that position. You probably there's probably a lot of teams that think to themselves, hey man, our defense could look pretty rock solid if we had a 6'6" guy spearheading it.
Yeah, I think the way he played fantastic in Kentucky's first couple NCAA tournament games, I think that really helped out his stock as well. All right, so before we finish up here, just a few things I wanted to ask you about. Who are some guys that you think could be some second-round steals, some sleepers in the second round that you think can turn into possibly some pretty good pros, rotation players that could help a club?
Well, while we're talking about, we just talked about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that a lot of teams want because of his height. I could see Shake Milton being a guy that for teams that maybe really wish they could get Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, then they could look at, hey, we didn't get him, but late in the first or early in the second, we could get Shake Milton, who is a really tall point guard who also happens to shoot the ball a lot better and a lot more consistently than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did. So I think he's the guy that teams could be a sleeper, and teams might be looking again just maybe a year or 2 or 3 in the future and say, hey, how did a guy like Shake Milton, who's that tall and that long and can shoot the ball that well, how did a team not want to take him in the teens or something like that? I also I always like to look at the guys that have such great college careers that are so productive in college but don't have maybe the prototypical NBA physical tools, and they fall. And I look at a guy like Javon Carter, and I just think like, hey, there's a guy that knows winning basketball and can defend his position, and that's a guy that, do I think he's ever going to maybe be a starting point guard? Maybe not, but if he's Patrick Beverley light, I mean, that's a really, really valuable player to a lot of teams. So Javon Carter is another guy. What do you think about a Javon Carter playing in the NBA?
Well, the only negative about Carter is he's 42 years old. I mean, other than that, he's pretty No, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think the guy is just a basketball player. I think sometimes you have to throw out the height and the the vertical leap and all this stuff that they test for. The guy can just play basketball. He's a relentless defender. He's not a bad shooter. I just think he's so tough. I would definitely take a flyer on him early, maybe even early in the second round. I've seen him in the 35 to 45 range mostly in most mock drafts. So I'm definitely a big fan of his. There's certain things you got to look out for, his size and everything, but I like him a lot. I would love him to be on my team any day of the week.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you're probably going to see Jalen Brunson go in the first round, maybe as high as the 20s, and he's a guy that I'm not trying to knock him or whatever, but he's a guy that doesn't have physical tools, is a good shooter but not an excellent shooter, but his feel for the game and his kind of championship pedigree is probably going to make him a comfortably in the first round. So if you're a team that's willing to spend maybe your 23rd pick on him, why not take a Javon Carter right afterwards? Because he's another guy that, though he doesn't have the championships, he's got a whole lot of college success, and even though he doesn't have maybe this prototypical size, he's got a great feel for the game. So I think Javon Carter is a guy that teams should look really strongly at.
Yeah, I think another guy you got to watch out for too is Keita Bates-Diop from Ohio State. Kind of had a breakout college year this past season, but with his, he's 6'8", really big wingspan, can shoot it from deep. I really like him a lot. I was shocked how well he played. I didn't anticipate that at all. He dealt with some injuries early in his career, but he finally got healthy and he put it all together in his final season. And I think he could possibly, be one of those maybe first picks in that second round.
Yeah, I think he's another guy that, though he doesn't have great athleticism, he's still a guy that could be, you could play him a bit at the 4 and a little bit at the 3 and just kind of, he could plug a hole where you need him and play him where you need him and just shoot the ball well enough to keep teams honest. He almost is, people kind of make jokes about this all the time. So this is a tired joke I'm going to make, but I could really see him on the Spurs. The Spurs just take guys like that with great feel for the game, but not great athleticism. And, kind of in the Kyle Anderson mold. Kyle Anderson's a guy that I kind of chuckled when they drafted, but I've turned him into a good piece. And they used Boris Diaw is a similar player that they had great success with. And I could see him going to the Spurs and just being a player that they use.
He's a kid that can run the floor. I mean, he really can. He was really good in transition this past season. So, and I feel good for him. He's had a pretty, not a rough go of it, but his brother's had some heart issues and stuff. So it's nice to see somebody be so successful. who's had problems in their life. But so before we finish up here, Eric, I wanted to just, you write for GatorCountry.com. You're a big Florida Gator fan. Do you see any of these seniors who are, eligible for this year's draft, possibly getting an opportunity, maybe even getting drafted? You have Kulichev, a guy like Chris Chioza. Do you think anybody gets an opportunity with the club?
I don't think anyone's getting their name called. That's, I would say, for sure. But I do think a team's going to really want Chris Chioza to come run their summer league team from the point. I look at a guy like TJ McConnell that's played some really meaningful minutes for the 76ers and say, like, hey, I wonder if Chris Chioza could do that, because he's small, but he defends really well and he passes the ball really well. And you always see at the end of the draft, like the moment the draft kind of ends, you start to see guys like Woj and Shams start to say, Ron Baker has been signed to a summer league deal, or Fred VanVleet has been signed to a deal with. There's those guys that teams don't draft but get signed right away to even some of them get guaranteed deals. Like Kyle Wiltshire got a guaranteed deal even right after the draft, even though the Houston Rockets didn't draft him. They were just like, hey, we'll just sign him because we can now sign him to less money because we didn't have to draft him. But so I think Chioza will get an opportunity to do it. I don't think he probably shoots the ball well enough, and I don't think he finishes at the hoop well enough for me to really project him being a regular NBA player. But he's a guy that kind of proved me wrong and played better than I thought he would as a senior. And I think maybe he does that at the next level. But Kulichev, he's a guy who maybe could be that knockdown shooter that a team could takes off the bench for 4 minutes a game, and he puts up 3 threes, and some games he goes 0 for 3, and some games he goes 3 for 3. But it was crazy. He just measured so small. He was like 6'4" with a 6.5 and a half wingspan, which is slightly smaller than Bradley Beal. I was joking about this with the people on the site in an article I wrote for Gator Country, that he actually measured smaller than Bradley Beal did. And he was playing the power forward for the Gators in the SEC. So I don't really know where you play him at the NBA level. So he'll get a summer league chance to go put up some shots and maybe get hot. But no, I don't think this current group of seniors is going to give any pro Gators. But there'll be some in the future. I think Jalen Hudson was a guy that went pretty deep into the draft process before deciding to come back to Florida. I think maybe an Andrew Nemhart, who's a rookie, who's a freshman this upcoming season. I think he might be an NBA draft pick in a couple of years. And I think there'll be some other guys that find their way, but not with the current guys that are eligible.
And one final question, I got to ask you: how do you feel about the 2018-19 Gators roster right now? Are you liking what you see?
I definitely do. I think just you look at the kind of seniors they're going to have in their starting lineup. I think they're going to have a senior in Kayvon Allen at the 2, a redshirt senior, 5th-year senior in Jalen Hudson at the 3, a redshirt junior at the 4 in Keith Stone, and then a senior in Kavarius Hayes at the 5, and then Andrew Nemhart has just been incredible at the FIBA U18s, and he's such a good passer. I think he might be able to start, but that kind of group of 4 really veteran guys, that's 4 guys who are either seniors or in their 4th or 5th years of eligibility in college, and I think that's going to be a really good starting lineup. And they also get Isaiah Stokes is going to be playing, who couldn't play last year because of an injury, and he's going to be a big man who can really finish inside. We know the Gators needed that, and I really like the team. I do think they'll be better this upcoming year than they were this past season, even though there might be a question mark at the point guard position. But I could talk about Florida for a while, so we might have to do this on another podcast so I don't make this one go too long. But
yeah, you mentioned Keith Stone. He's the kid I'm really going to be keeping an eye on. I think he's a possible breakout candidate. Somebody who's going to get more opportunities this year. Can really shoot the 3. Shot 42% last year. Average 8 and 4. Obviously, he played 24 minutes a game, but I think his minutes will go up, and I think he could be an impact player in the SEC at least. So I'm excited about this Florida team too. I think Mike White is an outstanding coach, and he's obviously doing a great job so far since he's arrived there. So, well, that's going to do it tonight, Eric. I can't thank you enough for coming on and joining me. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a ton of fun for me, and hopefully it's fun for your listeners too.
No problem. So, guys, again, that's Eric Fawcett from GatorCountry.com. You can check him out on Twitter. His Twitter handle is eFawcett, FAWCETT7. If you have any college basketball questions, NBA questions, he can pretty much answer anything. This is Tony Patelis. This is the College Hoop News Podcast. We'll hopefully be back soon with another episode. We'll talk to you later. If not, have a great summer, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.